You challenge us in your book to rethink the concept and definition of what makes a person or student intelligent. Why?
Because intelligence is beautiful. It's not a problem, it's beautiful. So, you know, it's human beings living in the world and flourishing and not getting hurt and not hurting other people. We have to have a deeper understanding of what it is to function intelligently. So if you go back in time, like Henry Perron said, intelligence is what can be measured. Rubbish. For instance, intelligence moves beyond just rational thinking. There's embodied intelligence. There's intelligence that is non-linear. It's not going to follow a rational line. There's intelligence that is sense, that's tacit, where you were using tacit knowing. So I struggled with this definition for it because there's a lot of definitions out there, but if you divorce an anxious attempt to get intelligence mapping onto what can be measured, I think you can come to a better place. And so I define intelligence as the conscious ability to solve problems.
Right.
And so that may be done creatively. It may use elements of rational and illogical thought, like something that would dissolve a supposition so you can get to somewhere else. And if we stand looking at intelligence like that, we reconceptualize what education is. We reconceptualize what value is in the world. So it's a richer view of intelligence.
But your assertion in the book is that our education system's definition of intelligence has been far too narrow.
Yes, and against that, there are teachers and students who live the embodied example of where that fails. But unfortunately, sometimes their intelligence is rendered invisible. So you can get this is where my whole thing came from for it. I kept trying to work out what is the invisible intelligence that doesn't get measured and appreciated and factored in. It doesn't appear in the political speeches. It doesn't appear in the assessment documents. What is that? Because sometimes when someone leaves school, they function as hugely, innovatively intelligent people in the world. So with our fascination at the moment with artificial intelligence, which I think is incorrectly named, I tried to look at what is human intelligence and how might that explain why people who sometimes do very badly at school do brilliantly in the world.
Is there a moral component?
So I think there's a moral component in most things. So I do. If you're dealing with human hope and fear, and those things are tied to human agency, then there's an ethical thing. So the truth is that we are all uneven. I'm uneven. You're uneven. We're all uneven. We're flawed in a flawed world, and we try to do the best we can. And we can't give away agency because that allows bad things to remain in place. So there is a cost for everything we do, and there's a cost in what happens to us. So therefore, it's an ethical consideration.
So talk to us a bit more about the definition of intelligence within the context of our educational system. By having too narrow a definition, how do you think that impacts the things that we learn and the ways in which we assess?
The experience that we can have in school is often tied to what gets rewarded and the things that we are told about ourselves. So if the metric that's used to measure us is less than our ability, only concentrates on part of our ability, which in many cases, when we preoccupy ourselves with micro-understanding education, like going, it should be literacy and numeracy and science, or it should be STEM, or it should be this. You go, all those things are relational. They all exist in relationship to each other. In the outside world, there aren't those disciplines. There are just things that exist in the world. And so where we tighten education and our assessment of education, where we do that, it can have a very destructive fallout on people who either think of things relationally or live things relationally, and there's a disconnect between our experience of the real world and our experience inside school. So you can get people going, Why am I only studying climate change in science? Because it's law, it's ethics, it's media, the Anthropocene in art. So we are in a challenging environment where we turn knowledge into disciplines, and then we assign certain bodies of knowledge to disciplines, and then we try to assess that knowledge, and we attach value to how and what is assessed.
I might ask you about an alternative vision in a few minutes' time, but perhaps we should reflect a little bit on your personal story. So you were well into your teenage years before you learned to read and write.
Yes.
Why?
I'm not dyslexic. So the supposition that if somebody is slow to gather those skills, there must be, we pathologize it. We say there's something wrong with it. The truth was that I became very anxious every time I was tested with reading. I couldn't bear to read aloud. It was like the guillotine came down. On Bert's word recognition test, you know, you'd get through the first line and you knew that Tysus was right at the bottom because you'd learnt that by heart. And the last question was, is there any other word you recognise on the page? But in fact, what it became was assessment became a display of anxiety, and anxiety got in the road of it. Now, fortunately, we've begun to try to unpack how anxiety interferes with how we assess. But I had come to believe that I had a reading age of 8.5, because that's what my parents had been told, and that's what had appeared on my records. And I came to live that. And so I thought, well, the fact that I like reading asterisks, I like reading things that have got pictures and words in them, means that that's less than the people who get out the big books with no pictures. I'm a kind of a dumbed down version. You know, I supervise people who are doing doctorates with graphic novels now and polysemic novels, and I write and direct films. But the sophisticated relationship between image and text wasn't part of how we assessed literacy. Literacy, in fact, was the ability to read and write in the culture of the dominant. And the culture. So to give an example of that, so I used to teach in Otara, and they were wee kids, they were 7 or 8. So most of the kids in the class did really badly in the literacy tests. They spoke 3 languages. They could translate and pun between languages. This hugely literate, highly sophisticated form of literacy, but it wasn't factored into the test. So you could get a monolingual strategist doing incredibly well in that test. But in terms of the skills, literacy skills that were being displayed, they were not being assessed like that. So they were in the behind class that I was assigned to. I saw them as wonderful, not because I was trying to be defensive and oppositional, but because they were. And you could see these literary skills working really sophisticatedly, but under the radar.
So what has changed in the decades since you were at school for kids like you?
It's a good question, and I can answer some of it and not answer some of it. I think we have started to ask questions about something we label neurodiverse. We've given a name to it, but I think neurodiverse describes everybody. Everybody. It's not assigned to a few things that are seen as challenges to an educational structure. You know, when we talk together, we're making meaning from 2 different brains. We're seeing slightly different emphases in what's being said. Even when we read something, how we read is different to each other. So we have this appreciation that there is diversity, and I think that's why there's a kickback often from educationalists and researchers when policy is driven and that simplifies things down, which goes things like, we all learn the same way. No, we don't, because we're not the same. But we have a more appreciative understanding of the fact that diversity, it's not a piece of virtue signalling, it's a reality, and to develop a good education system, you have to resource people with time and circumstances that can grow. So we are in a much better place. But we still get the invasion. When I'm always scared of any policy that comes out built on fear. So when you generate anxiety, go, you know, we have 30 years of education which went to hell in a handbag. And so now we're going to do, so people get afraid, and then you can bring in fundamentalist answers. So, you know, in the 1950s, when there was the intellectual moral panic about our national IQ was dropping, well, that piece of research was based on some IQ tests that are hugely flawed, but the nation became all afraid that nationally IQ was dropping, and we didn't ask the questions like, what do you mean? What is a national IQ, and how have you measured that? So today we have to remain attentive when people go, simplistic answers like going, if we give one dedicated hour to certain subjects, we can reform the education system. No, because knowledge is not contained in subjects, it's relational. So it's not going to fix by elevating STEM or STEAM or literacy or numeracy. It's going to elevate on being able to resource more dedicated time with people in learning environments that are not clogged up with administration, not clogged up with absolutely unfair expectations. So we are in a better place, but we have to remain always attentive. So I always think of it like this. Education doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So when we allow anxiety to rise, we will accept or we will be offered fundamentalist answers to complicated problems.
There are three big criticisms you identify within our education system that I wanted to ask you about. The first is streaming, which is still a feature in many New Zealand schools. You yourself were assigned to what you described as the naughty class. What's your problem with streaming?
Well, it's not, apart from the fact that the huge body of research shows that it's not successful. So in 2016, when the Sutton Trust did its meta-analysis of research, and it was looking at research on everything from homework to school uniforms to individual learning, and it was trying to work out from the research, what are the things that work well for people who are having a difficult time at school? Well, streaming along with performance pay, those sacred cows were turned towards the abattoir. So the research clearly shows that they don't work well for most people. They don't. So, and that's because you lose agency and faith in yourself. It causes people to lose agency and faith. And it also, this is what they call the Pygmalion effect, it can cause educators to presuppose that somebody's horizon is as close as it's been set on a piece of paper or it's set in a group, when in fact it's not. So that's only some educators. So, but the other things always struck me as strange. So I started teaching in primary school, and then I taught in intermediate, so I've taught at secondary schools, I've taught at polytechnics, teachers' colleges, universities. I know, but I actually love my job. I love teaching, and I don't see a huge difference depending on where in the education it occurs. But one of the arguments that's put is somehow if you stream, it'll get people ready for university. We don't stream at university. In my classes, there are intellectual refugees who are 28, who have come from a completely different education system where English is another language. I'm working with people who've come straight out of school. I'm working with people of diverse genders, diverse ethnicities, diverse skills. We don't stream. So that argument seems flawed. And it also assumes that if you, especially where streaming is used as a blanket system for dividing people, that the accumulated skills some people might be able to display in one discipline would therefore be related to the capacity to work with other areas of knowledge. Well, that's rubbish. You know, I started teaching at 19, couple of months' time, I'm 70. 50 years of trying to understand this beautiful, beautiful thing called intelligence. Streaming doesn't work for that. It doesn't work.
And perhaps even more controversial criticism you make in the book is a criticism of grading. You say that you oppose grading as a measure of achievement within assessment, so that kids should be assessed, to be totally clear, but they shouldn't be graded. They shouldn't be given a mark and then compared with other students. Why? Yeah. Given, I think many people would say, so much of adult life relies on a form of competition.
So no. So I would say no. I would say that what we call competition in adult life, what enables us to function is strategic cooperation. So if you think, we both came here today in the early morning on the motorway. So to do that, if we were competing with everyone, we wouldn't be here. There'd be a pile-up on the motorways. What we do is we work out what we want, and then we work with other people strategically to get it. So very successful people work very well like that. That competition, and if you allow competition to become the substrate from which education is built, then you have to accept that the success of some will be built on the debris of failure of others. But education is like health. It's trying to lift the greatest good for for people. So a person, the competition that works, but it's not competition, is actually the rigor we bring to ourselves to be better. But we're not competing with ourselves. We're trying to improve ourselves. That's not competition. That's something more complex.
I mean, I understand the motorway example, but arguably that is in the collective interest for everyone to work together in that. But when it comes to getting your job, or me getting my job, or companies winning contracts over other companies, I mean, there are so many elements in our professional lives that do rely on a form of competition.
I'm not denying that competition exists in the world. We engineer it into sports sometimes, and it exists when
most of the time.
Most of the time. Well, actually, in the true picture, probably not. If we understand playing as a, and we use it when there are limited resources, like there's one place or there's one account, one. But I think that we don't look deeply enough at the broad experience of living. And I would say that is less, it is still trying to get what you want. It's absolutely trying to get what you want. But you're actually having to work with something more sophisticated than outright competition. So it has to bring in skills of diplomacy, persuasion, proportion, all those things. It's more complex. So when we say education has to be competitive, I think we are taking a too simplistic lens to what the purpose of education is and how we'd achieve it.
Isn't there value in kids learning what it's like to fail?
Oh, you don't have to go to school to learn that. You don't have to go to school to learn to do that. And so, because we could then ask the same thing of health. Well, maybe people who need to learn that you have to fail, and we'd ask that of a health system. We wouldn't do that, or not in a healthy way. We wouldn't say, I'm going to the doctor and I'm going to be compared by people and I'm going to be competing to get the best. Only in a very unhealthy system would we be doing that. So while I acknowledge that competition is either an engineered or a strategy that is used when there is a paucity of resources, or we do it for the emotional rush when we watch, it can generate an emotional rush. I don't think applying it as a blanket solution to something as complex as growing human capacity for thought and the belief at such a level that you can go into a world that doesn't exist yet, I don't think that's a helpful way of looking at it.
So how are parents supposed to know how their kids are developing?
Oh, that's a good question. So, sometimes you get a parent go, how's my child doing? And I sometimes think, are you asking me, how is my child doing against some imagined or articulated milestones? Or are you asking me how your child learns? Because I think you would find more value if, instead of saying your child's behind with this and ahead with this, if I said, it's interesting, when I look at Samuel reading, when he doesn't know something, he will skip the word and then fill in its meaning later. So he doesn't have to read every word. That's one of the techniques he uses. But at the moment, he's also afraid, so he will give up quickly. So a strategy that we can use to deal with that is that we will take more time and treat it as something that might be, that it's okay not to get it right because the overall meaning's there. And then we start working on other things. Or going, Sophie she understands the words really well, but a thing that will really help is talk to her about what she's reading because her comprehension isn't as high. So what we're asking for an educator who's trained in this is a level of information far more than going, here's where they hit a milestone. And the real difficulty with that is that people like me and large numbers of other New Zealanders or people in the world don't hit those milestones. The milestones of our literacy and numeracy are on different roads. So they don't follow that order. It's similar when you're raising a child and someone goes, they should be doing this at this age and this at this age. And people go, oh, they're not. And you watch them at 16 and they're perfectly fine.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. And sometimes people who hit the milestones are not perfectly fine.
Yeah.
You know, but the fact is that milestones assume a convergence. They assume a similarity between people. And even though in the small print they go, you know, this doesn't everybody, people absorb them as something far more authoritative than they should be. And the danger is when we keep using those milestones, it's going, we will target this milestone. It's difficulty because if we accept that we think differently and we are neurodiverse, we have to have something more sophisticated than a set of milestones that we are tying things to. So to put it really bluntly, if you were to release the next generation of New Zealand kids into the world based on, and say that their performance in literacy and numeracy tests made them prepared, you'd be throwing them into a meat grinder because those skills are insufficient to deal with this. There's not the skills of discernment between the knowledge which is in the world now, which can be hyper-groomed. The ability to discern has become really, really important. The ability to estimate is really important. It's our most common mathematical device for thinking. So education is more complex and nuanced than simplistic answers. But I'm always heartened because I hear teachers and parents and kids often, they don't use that language, but they're talking about this. There's more to this than that. So when someone says, I failed the test, sometimes the test failed to measure you. It doesn't mean that we are all walking deities full of intellectual brilliance. We're not, we're uneven. But I would rather, if I'm a parent asking, I want a description of how my child is learning. I want to know how they are learning, not how they are doing. And they are slightly different things. And one you would get from a deeper expert.
I just wonder if assessment as it stands, and more broadly our education system as it stands, is by all means imperfect, but is a framework by which we can collectively navigate the experience or arrange and organise the system. And that what you have articulated will, to many people's eyes, be an amazing holistic vision of what education could be, but that actually it's not practical.
So my answer to that would be this. I'm still inside the education system because I believe in it. I absolutely believe in it. And I don't believe it's monolithic. And I understand it's flawed, and I'm flawed, and I even believe that it is the mark of an educated, of a good thinker, to be able to work inside one system and enrich it with the visions of others. So we can coexist. School education, when it has a kind of fluidity to it, and it does, because people are disobedient, and I don't mean in a negative way. They are. You're dealing with thought, for heaven's sake. So I'm actually quite proud of our education system. I don't think it's falling apart at the seams. I think we're capable of improving it. So, you know, at the moment I have 14 PhD students. So almost a third of those are people who've come to this country to study because we give safety to think. We can provide, we have an education system that has been built, one of the most social education systems in the world, hugely discursive. Between the 1930s and the 1970s, people came from all over the world to look at this extraordinary education system that didn't fracture. So I don't have a hugely negative view of education. I have a hopeful view, and I believe one of the ways we can do that is to empower difference inside it and enable difference to coexist with it, so that when we have limited things, or we have limited resources, we have limited times, we go, that's the reality of now. So how do we work with it? We don't just abdicate responsibility and go, well, that's just it. And so we just, 70% of people do well. That statistic exists nowhere, but that's what's thrown around sometimes. And the others, well, yeah, it's kind of tough. You go, no, not good enough. So I believe deeply that even an individual is capable of affecting change. And I think that cynicism is the death of hope and the death of agency. And without agency, nothing improves.